Congressman Adam Schiff of California, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Chairman Schiff, thank you so much for being here. And I want to play back for you a clip of your impeachment closing argument, which I recommend everyone to go on YouTube and find and listen to. This is just a piece of it. Take a listen.
Now, you may be asking, how much damage can he really do in the next several months until the election? A lot of damage. And you know, you can't trust this president do what's right for this country. You can trust he will do what's right for Donald Trump.
What are you the most worried about him doing between now and Election Day, given what he's already done?
Well, I guess, first and foremost, I'm worried that he'll continue this terrible mishandling of the pandemic, of the protests in our streets, that he will further divide us. He'll further leave Americans vulnerable to becoming ill and dying from the virus. But he will also continue this path of delegitimizing the votes of millions, seeking to disenfranchise them, but those who do vote by absentee, seeking to discredit those votes, and contesting the results of the election. So that's a lot, I know, Joy, but sadly, he's given us every reason to be concerned about all those things.
You know, it was striking to hear Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, walk back his participation, which shocked so many people, including so many military people, that he took part in that political photo op. But Donald Trump has not backed down from what was done. As a matter of fact, he seemed to double down on this rhetoric of violence that he seems to sort of, want to see committed against protesters. This was Donald Trump praising the National Guard response to Minneapolis protests. I want you to take a listen.
We are very proud of the fact that I said, I'm sorry, we have to have them go in. And they went in, and it was like a knife cutting butter right through, boom. I'll never forget, you saw the scene on that road, wherever it may be, in the city, Minneapolis, they were lined up, boom, they just walked straight. And yes, there was some tear gas and probably some other things, and the crowd dispersed and they went through. By the end of that evening, and it was a short evening, everything was fine, and you didn't hear too much about that location having problems anymore.
First of all, it was the Minneapolis police who were the ones who were accused of mistreating protesters. But like a knife through butter, it is a strange way to talk about the American military troops on the streets of an American city. He seems to almost be sort of glorifying and just the idea and just sort of imagining violence. It is odd. What do you make of it?
Well, he does glorify violence. And I think from the beginning of these peaceful protests, he's really tried to egg on this kind of violence in the streets, egg on a more militaristic response by police, calling in troops. Look, I was glad to see General Milley acknowledge the terrible mistake that he made. And I think it was very important that we had people like Secretary Mattis speak out, Colin Powell speak out, and others. I think that's a big reason why General Milley felt he needed to do what he did. But as we pointed out during the trial, this president is not going to change. He has this love and fascination for autocrats around the world. He models his own conduct after them. He praised the Chinese for their crackdown in Tiananmen Square. So we can't be surprised when he now lashes out at peaceful protesters, calls them terrorists, brags essentially about the ability to use police or military force against them. And he's not going to change. But what we really do need is people around him, people in Congress, to stand up to him, speak out, do what they can to constrain him through the remaining months of his presidency. We'd be a lot better off, Joy, frankly, if he went back into his bunker and waited out the rest of his presidency instead of doing more harm.
Yeah, it wasn't lost on many of us that he turned around and tried to threaten governors the same way he tried to threaten the president of Ukraine, using the same formula. Not lost on a lot of Americans. And just to note, just to put a button on his sort of treatment of the way he thinks about the military and the way the rest of the world should treat it, he has now authorized sanctions against International Criminal Court members who are probing possible Afghan war crimes by U.S. personnel. So I think that tells you what he thinks. But I want to ask you about one other thing while I have you. The other thing, there's been a lot of talk about looting. But looting can mean a lot of things. And I think for a lot of Americans, what feels like looting is $500 or $600 billion being squirreled away by the Treasury Secretary, and the American people don't get to know who got it. Here is a headline from the Washington Post. The Trump administration won't say who got $511 billion in taxpayer-backed coronavirus loans. The apparent decision to withhold loan records is the latest of several actions by the Trump administration that could shield the federal coronavirus response from public scrutiny. The Trump administration has taken steps to undermine the independence of executive oversight bodies, declaring that the special inspector general overseeing the CARES Act funding cannot submit reports to Congress without presidential supervision. Sir, are you going to, as a member of Congress, as a senior member of Congress, going to be able to find out for the American people who Steve Mnuchin is giving that money to, the American people's money?
We are going to find out. We're going to keep pressing until we do. There will be accountability. But true to form, the president is resisting all of that, firing inspector generals, going to extraordinary lengths to try to keep from the country, for example, not just these loans that went out through the SBA, but this whole industry fund. We have very little visibility into how those funds are being used. But what we can see in terms of the administration's actions is administration characterized by nepotism, corruption, cronyism. And we're going to get to the bottom of all of the misexpenditures by this administration. And I think as we saw in the months leading up to the Senate trial, their ability to keep things secret only goes so far. The truth comes out in the end. And we just need to make sure that we can hold this president accountable in real time and make sure those dollars get to Americans that really need them.